Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a massive, honestly fascinating historical question. Did traditional Islamic scholars just blindly hate logic because it was a foreign concept? Or did they actually possess a highly sophisticated, deeply analytical critique of the science of logic itself? Let's unpack what the greatest Islamic thinkers actually had to say about this, based directly on our sources. We're going to map out this entire philosophical deconstruction step by step. We'll start with the history, dive into the critiques of conceptualization and the syllogism, and finally, look at how these scholars rebuilt the foundations of reasoning using the natural intellect. Let's get right into it.
First up, let's set the historical stage and tackle this myth of anti-intellectualism head-on.
So the timeline tells a really compelling story here. The sources show us that brilliant early Islamic scholars, like Sibawayh and Grammer and some of the greatest early physicians, were making huge scientific leaps long before Greek logic was ever in the picture. It wasn't until Al-Ghazali came along that Greek logic was deeply integrated into Islamic sciences, almost becoming the gold standard. But later, Ibn Taymiyyah stepped onto the scene, put this entire Greek framework under a microscope, and literally began to dismantle it piece by piece.
And this brings us to a brilliant quote that perfectly captures Ibn Taymiyyah's final verdict. He basically argued that formal logic is just unnecessary. His famous line translates to, "The intelligent do not need it, and the dull do not benefit from it." Think about that. If you're smart, your natural intuition gets you to the truth faster. And if you naturally struggle with concepts, piling on overly complex rules isn't going to help you anyway.
Now let's look at exactly how they tore this system down, starting with the very first pillar, the critique of conceptualization and logical definitions. Okay, so the Greek logicians claimed that you can't truly understand or conceptualize anything in reality unless you give it a super strict formal definition, which they called a had. They wanted to use abstract, almost geometric terminology like genus to divide everything into rigid little boxes. But contrast that with Ibn Taymiyyah's view. He argued that we absolutely don't need these academic definitions to comprehend the world around us. He pointed out that human beings naturally and directly derive knowledge through their senses. You know things by seeing them, touching them, experiencing them, not by memorizing a perfect, wordy definition. And here's the absolute kicker. Ibn Taymiyyah pointed out a massive flaw called infinite regress. If every single concept requires a strict definition to be understood, well, what about the words you use in that definition? Don't they need defining too? And the words in those definitions? It goes on forever. You end up completely paralyzed in this endless loop of words, never actually reaching true knowledge. To make this super concrete, just imagine tasting a piece of fruit or looking at a horse. You instantly know what that horse is, right? You know exactly how that fruit tastes the second you take a bite. You don't need a logician to formally define the horse for you as a neighing animal for your brain to process it. Our minds completely bypass those clunky verbal hurdles. So that's the first pillar down. Let's move to the second, the illusion of the syllogism, or formal judgment. Logicians claimed that true judgments can only come from a syllogism. You probably know this setup. It's that strict formula where you combine a major premise and a minor premise to force a logical conclusion. It's like interlocking blocks that have to fit together perfectly to build a thought. But the sources give us a much more grounded example. Imagine you're walking in a forest and you look down and see fresh animal footprints. Any smart person instantly knows, hey, a predator was just here. You entirely bypass the need to stop and construct a multi-step syllogism in your head about how all footprints indicate walking. No, human intuition jumps to the right conclusion in a split second. Because of this, the core critiques of the syllogism are devastatingly simple. It's just unnecessarily complex. It's mental gymnastics that really only proves vague, abstract universals in your head while completely failing to give us specific, concrete facts about the real outside world. It basically ignores our obvious human intuition. Which brings us to a pivotal moment in this analysis. If Greek logic isn't the ultimate path to truth, what alternative epistemologies did these thinkers propose? Seriously, it's a fascinating question. If we throw out Aristotle's rulebook, how do we actually acquire vital, absolutely certain knowledge? How do we build certainty? The alternatives highlighted in the sources are incredibly practical. We're talking about direct empirical observation using our senses. We're talking about practical analogy. And we're talking about mass testimony, which is when you have overwhelming reports from massive crowds of people. Take mass testimony, for instance.
Most of us have never physically traveled to China, right? We haven't seen it with our own eyes, but we have 100% absolute certainty that it exists. Why? Because of overwhelming, continuous reports from thousands of people across generations. That undeniable certainty completely shatters the idea that we need a formal syllogism to know something is true.
Furthermore, Ibn Taymiyyah elevated practical analogy way above the Greek syllogism. Knowing that a fire will burn you today because you've experienced fire burning in the past, that is empirical, it's practical, and it is absolutely certain. It's infinitely more reliable than abstract theoretical deductions happening solely in your mind.
All right, let's bring it all together. How does this massive deconstruction tie back into the natural state of being human?
Well, Islamic thinkers champion this incredible concept called fitra. It's the innate human intellect. It's an internal scale for truth placed directly into the human heart by the Creator. This scale naturally, almost effortlessly, distinguishes right from wrong and truth from falsehood without needing any complex logical gymnastics.
You can see this instantly in action. The Fitra knows, without a shadow of a doubt, that a just society prospers and an oppressive society falls apart. It grasps these deep moral realities immediately. Meanwhile, Greek logic often just leads philosophers into endless abstract debates where nobody ever agrees on anything. And when it comes to theology, Ibn Taymiyyah pointed out a massive, glaring flaw. At best, logic can only guess at some vague, necessary existent, or first cause, but it completely and utterly fails to prove any specific divine attributes like the Creator's knowledge or power. To truly understand those things, you absolutely need divine revelation. Logic just can't get you there.
So as we wrap up this explainer, we have to ask ourselves, was this profound Islamic critique of logic just anti-intellectualism? Or was it, in reality, the ultimate intellectual liberation, freeing the human mind from the rigid ancient Greek frameworks that had boxed it in for centuries? The sources make it clear, the mind is a natural, perfectly capable scale. It doesn't need Greek weights to find the truth. And that leaves us with a pretty provocative question. What other philosophical frameworks or truths have we accepted today as absolute necessities that we actually don't need at all? Think about that. Thanks for joining us on this explainer, and we'll see you next time.